Mike Owens here. Today I'm joined by Jon Anik. It's in many ways the voice of the UFC, UFC commentator, host of the Anik and Florian podcast, and a whole lot more. Jon, pleasure and honor to get your time today. How are things for you today?
Mike, great to be with you, brother. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
First and foremost, you obviously have a little bit of a rest this weekend. This Saturday, the UFC heads to London. Now you'll be back in action for Salt Lake City. How important at this stage of your career are rest weeks? And if so, how do you spend your weekends away from the cage?
So there's a lot of ebb and flow to the UFC schedule, right? The first quarter of 2023 was very international heavy when it comes to the pay-per-views. My process usually starts like 10 days out. So as I talk to you today, I have the UFC 291 fight card in front of me. Now, a lot of black lines on it because Paulo Costa is no longer competing, but I have all my fighter bios printed. Tomorrow or later today, about 9 days out, I'll voice all of the combo features, the in-arena stuff. So there is work to be done. And more often than not, I find myself working on the weekends. Like we're doing 2 episodes of the Anik and Florian podcast on Sunday, and I'll be watching MMA on Saturday night. So it's very important in terms of preserving my voice and in terms of my mental and physical well-being and health to not be on an airplane, to be sure. But sometimes I'll do 3 and 4 weeks, and then I'll have 2 or 3 weekends away. The back-to-backs are particularly challenging. Like I'll do a pay-per-view July 29th in Salt Lake City, Utah, and then August 5th in Nashville, Tennessee. I'd much rather do a pay-per-view into a fight night than a fight night into a pay-per-view, which is just a real monster, those 12 or 13 pay-per-views a year. But yeah, the preparation kind of is the devil I know at this point in time, and I lean heavily into it. And, yeah, but it does begin 10 days out. There's not as much sort of downtime as one might think.
How much preparation goes into, say, an individual fight, Jon? If we say a prelim main event on a UFC pay-per-view, not the biggest card not the biggest fight on the cards, but obviously a fight of supreme importance, how much preparation in terms of man hours on average that goes into your prep?
So it's dependent, right? Like I'm sitting here talking to you after having a week or 2 off into a pay-per-view. So it stands to reason that these athletes at UFC 291 might get a little bit more of my time than the athletes in Nashville, right? Yeah. Because I will be in Salt Lake City next week around this time, voicing the Nashville show when my focus should probably be entirely on the pay-per-view. And the schedule falls the way it falls, and I'm very thankful for the work and all of that, right? But inevitably, some of the Nashville prep is going to happen during the pay-per-view week. Whereas this week, I have no such interference with my pay-per-view prep. So I don't know, maybe an hour per athlete, which if you have 15 fights is 30 hours. Certainly if I have a fighter meeting, it'll end up being more than an hour because I'll have 15 or 20 minutes with them in addition to doing their fighter card and whatever film study comes with that. But generally speaking, my fighter cards, and this is what they look like if you're watching on video. Those I will write as I'm watching film. And, if I'm really in a crunch, maybe I would spend as little as 30 minutes on a fighter. But I also wake up on show day in Nashville because it's on the East Coast and I have a little bit of time on show day. So I might wake up on the day of the show and say, all right, I'm light on CJ Vergara and I'll be able to fill in the blanks. But I use every goddamn minute to try to maximize my time and make sure that I don't miss something major.
No, I'm sure that's what makes you the best, Jon. Talking about 291, you mentioned it there. I'd like to talk a little bit about this main event that we've got. Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje in a rematch about 5 years in the making. For this time for the BMF title on the line. When you look back at the initial BMF in 2019 between Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz, do you see this second iteration of the BMF as an upgrade or a downgrade on the original?
It's a great question, and I hate to fence it when I get such a thoughtful question. But if you think about how many guys may fight for the BMF title, as Dana determines who is worthy of that distinction. Right now, as long as this main event goes off without a hitch, our list is Jorge Masvidal, Nate Diaz, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier. It's a pretty gaudy list. You know what I mean? Like, who are the next 2 individuals that are going to be worthy of fighting for this belt? Now, it's not an undisputed belt, but who are the guys who are most worthy of it? And at least as far as championship stakes, these 2 are closer to the belt than perhaps Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz were when they fought at UFC 244 or whatever it was. Yeah. So, gosh, I mean, it's a hard question, but I would probably have to lean. I love you, Game Bread. I love you, Nate Diaz. I mean, we got Nate right here, my man. I mean, we got Nate right here. But bro, I gotta say, Poirier and Gaethje are fighting at a true title eliminator, and as such, I think you would have to say it's just elevated a skosh.
That was kind of the next question I wanted to ask, as you mentioned, as you alluded to there, Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje both held the interim title at lightweight. They've both fallen short against Khabib Nurmagomedov. They've both fallen short against charlesoliveira. With that being said, do you feel like this is the right time to introduce a BMF title into what is already a fantastic fight between two top lightweights?
Well, it's interesting, right? Neither of these guys is going to be next for Islammakhachev, so it stands to reason that they may not get a shot. The winner of this fight between Poirier and Gaethje may not get a shot at the undisputed title for a year, and then it makes a ton of sense. But if undisputed gold is still the goal, right? I mean, I don't think that's going to hold anything up for Poirier or Gaethje. I think, you know, for them, it'd probably be good if Islammakhachev beats Charles Oliveira a second time. It's clean, and obviously they don't have any history there. But yeah, it's a good question, man, right? Because I don't know that it needs that. And I don't even know that it needs that belt to stand alone as a 5-round pay-per-view main event. But it's cool, you know, it's promotable for sure. And I think it only elevates the winner. I wouldn't mind seeing the winner of this fight potentially defend the BMF belt, depending on who the opposition might be. And that's when it gets funky in terms of who actually can fight for this thing. But Justin Gaethje, I just don't know how long he wants to do this for. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I just feel like a lot is going to be tied to the result. Like if he beats Dustin Poirier, his next fight is probably going to be for the undisputed championship. Like that's why he's doing this. Yeah. And so is Dustin, to be sure. But I think Dustin has more fights left than Justin, just in terms of overall appetite. So I think a lot is going to be tied to this result, especially on the Gaethje side.
100%. You mentioned there about Islammakhachev coming up against Charles Oliveira. I believe that's to UFC 294. That was announced yesterday. There was a lot on MMA Twitter over the last couple of days. I saw Islam calling out Leon, Volkanovski then calling out Islam for that rematch that occurred back in February. Do you feel like Islam versus Charles 2 is the correct fight at lightweight?
Yeah, and I would be curious to get your opinion as well. Absolutely in a meritocracy. Since you don't have a fight book, you wait for Dariush Charles Oliveira, and then Charles do Bronx Oliveira goes out and does that. He essentially makes himself undeniable. And it's not like they needed to announce Abu Dhabi 9 days before Gaethje and Poirier, right? And maybe they did. I don't think they did, though. And the fact that they would do that just speaks to how great a singular win that was. I mean, nobody had beat Dariush for years, and Charles Oliveira was just like, all right, you know, next. Yeah. Unbelievable sum of Charles Oliveira's win. So yes, I think that's the right fight. Volkanovski's on the mend a little bit. I do believe Ilia Topuria has emerged, so I think that makes sense for Volkanovski. But obviously, if Islammakhachev is not the lightweight champion at some point in time, then that Volkanovski rematch, at least on the Volk side, isn't as appetizing. So there are factors to it. But yes, I think in a meritocracy, this is absolutely the right fight in what I believe is the best division, 155 pounds.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And keeping with the BMF theme, John, what I would like to do next is I would like to go through each of the divisions individually, and you tell me the first BMF name that comes to mind. So try not to think a little bit too much about this. Just try and think about who comes to mind. I'm not asking for a matchup. I'm asking for an individual. So let's start with 125 flyweight.
What a great question. Brandon Royval. What a great question. It makes me want to write this down and do it on my show and give you all the goddamn credit in the world, Mike.
Thank you. 135.
Dominic Cruz, man. I mean, sorry to the rest of the bantamweight division. People don't know how bad a mother effer Cruz he really is. So Dominic Cruz at 35.
I may counter you there and go Corey Sandhagen, but I'm not asking for my picks. I'm asking for your picks, and there we will go
fair.
145 and featherweight.
145. Part of me thinks of Darren Elkins, so why not just give it to Darren the Damage Elkins?
Good pick. Lightweight 155.
I could give this to any of them. That's the point. I can't go Poirier Gaethje because they're fighting for the BMF belt, and that would be a tremendous cop-out and tremendously one-sided of me. Tony Ferguson, let's see. Yep, he's still fighting at lightweight. So Tony Ferguson could absolutely fight for a BMF belt and nobody would bat an eye. So we'll go Ferguson at 55.
I agree. Welterweight?
Oh my gosh, man. Oh my gosh. I could look down at the fight card right now and probably find a real badass for you. Who should fight for the BMF belt? Who's the BMF at 170 pounds? Gosh. Let's go with Leon Edwards right now. Let's go into champion, because why not? Because why not?
I'll give you that, yeah.
I mean, who do you got at 70 for me, Michael? Who do you have?
My counter would have been Vicente Luque. In terms of
that's a good one. Yeah, I could say Dos Anjos is a bad mother. I went through a lot of them, but if I say Bilal Muhammad, people are like, come on, man, you know. So yeah, that's interesting.
Middleweight?
You know, I'd like to say Marvin Vettori, but maybe I'll go with the guy who almost beat him, Roman Dolidze.
Light heavyweight, 205?
So Jamahal Hill's the guy, man, you know. I don't know if Johnny Walker is too smiley to be that type of guy, but he certainly flips the switch in a way that most people don't understand. You know, Ryan Spann can be a bad mother effer himself, but you know, let's give Johnny Walker a little shine. He's on a real championship trajectory. We'll go Johnny Walker Blue at 205.
And finally, heavyweight?
I mean, we made these One More Sleep GOAT designs in honor of Jon Jones. Is Jon Jones not the human personification of the baddest motherfucker in the room? Is he not, Mike?
Yeah, I think if you're going in true sense of the word BMF, I think that constitutes Jon Jones, 100%.
Yeah, I agree.
Fantastic. Thank you for completing that exercise, John. I had a lot of fun doing that. And moving towards the co-main event, we've got janblachowicz taking on Alex Pereira. First and foremost, there's been a lot of chatter online about would this fight be for the UFC 205-pound title after Jamahal Hill's vacation of that belt. What is your opinion? Do you think this should be for 205-pound gold?
I don't think it should be, and maybe the promotion is going to reverse course, and it's not as though my opinion always has to dovetail with what the UFC is doing. But no, I mean, I think you just leave it as is. The stakes are high, extremely high. It's a title eliminator. It's scheduled for 3 rounds, and perhaps that will better align with Yuri Prochazka's calendar. It's certainly disappointing that Jamahal Hill is no longer going to be the champion here as soon as this belt is put on the line. But if Prochazka doesn't fight the rest of this year, and you really would like to have Prochazka or Jamahal Hill be a part of this next title fight, right? In a perfect world. So, you know, I think you let this marinate. You keep the stakes the way they are. And the winner of this fight fights Yuri Prochazka December 2023 or January 2024. Now, that's hugely speculatory on my behalf as far as Yuri Prochazka's calendar. But if he gets back in any semblance of reasonable time, I think you just let this one marinate as a title eliminator, and then you elevate the winner to the #1 contender spot as soon as Yuri's ready.
100%. We've seen a lot of champions handle injury or suspension in a lot of different ways. Some champions don't feel the need to vacate their title, and we've obviously seen a pattern over the last year at 205 where Hill obviously followed by Yuri Prochazka. What do you make of Jamahal Hill vacating his UFC light heavyweight title? Do you think it was the right decision?
It's interesting. I don't know what all goes into it. I don't know how hard he fought to say, hey, I can be back in 12 months, do an interim, please. I just don't know how all that works in terms of the financials. But these were obviously 2 major injuries for Yuri Prochazka, the shoulder, and Jamahal Hill, the Achilles. And I think the circumstances were such that they just felt like they needed to strongly push the champion in this direction. In terms of like semantics, Jamahal Hill is actually still the champion and won't be the former champion until the belt is put on the line. But it is interesting because historically there have been plenty of instances in which they've gone the other direction where a champion just sits and they do an interim belt. So yeah, I feel like Jamal's going to be out a long time, and Achilles rehab is pretty substantial, and that's why they went in this direction. But he said the UFC is going to take care of him in his YouTube video. I don't know exactly what that means, financially or otherwise, surgery or otherwise, but yeah, it's just crazy, man. Like, these guys are so talented. The Prochazka Jamahal Hill was like a dream fight of Mick Maynard in the UFC, and just really too bad, really too effing bad.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Do you think it should maybe be a standardized process in terms of the injury dependent or time frame dependent should be whether a champion is allowed to vacate his belt? Do you think it should be an individual decision based on how the champion feels? How do you think this should be standardized, if at all possible?
Well, it's not a game of equality, and neither is my business, sports broadcasting, right? I mean, we have certain champions like Aljamainsterling who might be sort of rushed to a date, and then there are other champions like Leon Edwards who maybe get to call the shots in terms of their timeline, right? Yeah. So, I mean, Aljamainsterling defended the belt a couple months after Leon Edwards, right? But Leon was very frontal about it and said, I'm going to defend the belt in either October or November. He mentioned Abu Dhabi right away and sort of set the timeline and set the expectations. And Aljamainsterling didn't necessarily, do that. So I don't know if you can do standardized procedure. I think the fight game is such that you need to have the wiggle room promotionally to use the interim belts, not to leverage them, but just to use them. And again, like, I love the fact that Yair Rodriguez has an interim championship belt at home. Like, is that such a bad thing? Because most people disagree with me on this. It's not that they bemoan the fact that Yair or Dustin Poirier or Justin Gaethje, right, all worthy guys, have these interim belts. It's just they don't like it when sometimes there's a frequency with which they're on the line in a given 12 months, and then they get their panties in a bunch, if we can say that. Like, I don't know how you feel about it. A lot of people are very anti-interim belt.
I'm pro interim belt under the right circumstances. If I'm being totally honest, I wasn't 100% comfortable with an interim belt being on the line for the featherweight division while where the featherweight champion is on the same card. That felt a little bit to me like overkill. But having said that, I understand that if those guys in the interim fight get paid more and get that prestige and get that assurance that they will get the world title fight next, then I'm comfortable with that security.
I think we should make the interim belt silver, and maybe that just really devalues it, and maybe we shouldn't necessarily do that. But in that, I do like promotionally when you have the interim belt and the actual belt on the line the same night, if you're going to let a guy do a super fight like you did in that instance with Alexander Volkanovski, then you might as well, if he's going to leave the division to go do that. See, the reason I was okay with it that night, and I know we don't have to spend too much time on this, but I was okay with it that night because Volkanovski's leaving the division to go chase further greatness. So it's okay to do an interim championship belt here and then determine on the same night who he's going to be fighting next and build momentum for that fight, which I think they did in a unique way. So if they were to give Makhachev a chance to go up, at least have a lightweight title eliminator the same night, I think it makes a lot of sense.
And the other benefit with that is on similar timelines, your interim champion and your defending champion in the occasion that he doesn't win the belt at the higher weight class, they're on similar time frames for that unification. So there is that. You mentioned Leon Edwards a couple of moments ago, and I did want to talk about Leon because Leon was the last man at the scene of the crime in Salt Lake City back in UFC 278. On that night, in Leon's fight, in the Paulo Costa Luke Rockhold fight, and in the Aldo Merab fight, there was a lot of talk about elevation, and did elevation play a factor in the results in those fights? You were obviously there on that night, so what is your opinion on that? And do you think that these fights that we're talking about may be affected by elevation?
Yes, I think it will affect some fights and some fighters, and sometimes you don't know how it's going to affect you. And even if you sleep in a hyperbaric chamber and do all the right things and come out there early as Leon Edwards did, sometimes it just can get you on fight night. And sometimes you can be flat on fight night and fight at elevation and chalk it up to that. Maybe it's not necessarily that. So I'm within my lane and my expertise on that. I think to dismiss it as a factor would be absolutely ignorant. And I think most athletes take it as some sort of consideration. As a runner myself, it's certainly much harder running in the thin air of Utah than it is in the humidity of South Florida, if you can believe that. So, yeah, I think it's a factor, especially in a 5-round fight. I think Gaethje's leg kicks are more a factor than the altitude potentially, but yeah, I think absolutely it's a big deal. And we're excited to go back to the house that John Stockton and Karl Malone built, but the house that Leon Edwards built. They actually have a shrine now, at the Delta Center, where Leon Edwards, produced that masterpiece against Kamaru Usman. So we're excited to go see the Leon Shrine when we get to Salt Lake City.
Fully deserved. Last one from me, John. I know you're a busy man. I'm going to go out and say it. I think you're the best to have ever done what you do in terms of that play-by-play, I believe is the American term for what you do. Is that play-by-play?
That's right.
I get the two terms mixed up because they're not something that we use over here, but you're one of the best broadcasters to ever do it, to ever grace our wonderful sport of MMA. As somebody who is trying to report, is trying to broadcast on the sport, as we talked about off camera, is trying to build a podcast with a UFC fighter, Rob Font, shout out Font Forecast. What ideas or what pieces of advice would you give to somebody like me who is constantly trying to improve their own presentation and broadcasting skills?
Well, you sound great. I think your question formation is really good. One thing that I was taught in an ESPN workshop back in the days, you really want to try to avoid yes or no questions. And that can depend on your subject, right? Oftentimes when I'm turning to Joe Rogan, I'm doing it in an open-ended way. I'm not saying, what has brought Pantoja to the cusp of a world title. I'm just saying, incredible to watch him rise, and Joe can take it or DC can take it any which way they want. But question formation is a big deal. Trying to be efficient, trying to master how to pause, which I think I finally have figured out on my podcast. Instead of having a verbal crutch like or candidly or for me, the F word is my foremost crutch. I finally figured that out. Be comfortable pausing and figure out how to pause. And then just overall bigger picture, crystallize what it is you like to do and what you don't like to do. And then try to develop skills in that area. Because if you want to be a reporter, then keep interviewing fighters. Now, if you enjoy interviewing fighters, keep interviewing fighters, right? But try to figure out what you enjoy, what you're good at, and some sort of parlay of that, and try to channel your energy in that direction.
And especially on the broadcast, John, you do have a unique ability to always have the right words available for you at the right time. What would you say about that in terms of being able to keep your cool in such a heated moment, if you like, and being able to not only form words coherently, which is something most of us would struggle with, but also to be able to put that message across in such an eloquent way?
Well, I'm focused. I'm very devoted to not just the fighters and the whole fight week preparation, but I'm devoted to the craft. And I take seriously providing the soundtrack for these historical moments. I wasn't always calling the title fights, but I never think about what I'm going to say, but I'm just very focused in the moment. Because oftentimes it's as simple as, RDA by round 4 TKO, right? You don't necessarily need to come up with something cheesy or a catchphrase. But I take those big moments, especially when fighters win a title for the first time. I'm not thinking about the promotion, the UFC repurposing it in the countdown show. I'm thinking about Janblachowicz going back and watching himself become a UFC champion and having that call mean something, whether I inject Poland or something else into it. So we take the fight ending moments pretty seriously, and I appreciate you acknowledging that. And I think it's just focus and just trying to provide a uniqueness to every championship moment within the chaos as best we can.
I love it. I think that's the best place for us to end. John, thank you so much for your time today. It was an honor to sit down, break down some of these fights and get your opinions on some of these big topics in the sport. Thank you for all that you do, and I look forward to seeing you back on my television next Saturday night.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate you. You're well on your way, and we'll do it again soon. Thank you, man.